Hello friends, I won't take much of your time. I just ask you to subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
When my brother got down on one knee in front of 23 family members, our mom's closest friends, his fiancée's parents, and enough catered food to feed an army, I felt her hand on my wrist, squeezing tight enough to leave a mark. And then she leaned in, without even turning her head toward me, and hissed, "Don't screw this up. Don't steal his spotlight with your drama." I didn't answer. I just swallowed the words that were climbing up my throat, nodded like a good little sister, and smiled through my clenched jaw. I should have left it there, honestly. I should have kept quiet like she asked, but something in that moment told me I wasn't the only one holding something in. The whole proposal was the kind of Pinterest-perfect scene that made you want to roll your eyes and also cry at the same time. My brother, Jason, wore a stupidly expensive blue suit and had somehow coordinated the entire event to match the gold and navy color theme of his future wedding. His fiancée, Kate, looked like she'd stepped out of a bridal magazine. Flowing white dress, perfect soft curls, mascara in just the right amount to suggest she had no idea he was about to propose, even though we all knew she definitely did. When Jason pulled out the ring, some sparkly monstrosity that probably cost him a year's rent, and dropped to one knee on the patio deck of our parents' lake house, the crowd gasped. Someone actually clapped, and Kate pretended to be shocked. I watched her face, not Jason's. I know my brother inside out. He's been lying since we were kids, and I could always tell when he was hiding something. But Kate, she had this expression for just a second, barely there, like she wasn't surprised, like maybe she knew this proposal wasn't quite what it seemed. And then it was gone, covered in giggles and oh my God, and one dramatic yes that had everyone erupting like a damn high school pep rally. Champagne popped, glasses were passed around, people hugged, and I stood back in the corner by the cake table with my warm plastic cup of Prosecco, trying not to let my face say too much. That's when my mom swooped in again. She was all fake smiles and careful makeup, the kind of woman who's been playing Southern belle roles since before I was born. She didn't look at me, just stared at the happy couple, her voice syrupy and sharp all at once. "This day is not about you," she said like a fact, not an insult. "Don't start anything. I know how you get when you're feeling dramatic." I didn't say anything. There wasn't much to say. She had already decided I was a problem before I'd done a thing. That's always been the way in our family. Jason the golden boy, me the emotional hurricane. And yeah, sure, I've made mistakes. I've definitely had my moments, loud ones, but I wasn't wrong this time. And if my mom had been paying attention to anything but appearances, maybe she would have noticed the tightness in Kate's shoulders, the way her hands kept gripping the stem of her glass just a little too hard, or how she avoided Jason's eyes for most of the evening. After the main toast, Jason giving a painfully scripted speech about love, second chances, and finding your forever, I walked out onto the dock to get some air. The lake was calm, reflecting the strings of lights from the party like a painting, and I almost convinced myself to forget it. Just let it go, let him be happy, let Mom have her picture-perfect day. But when I turned around, Kate was standing right behind me. She didn't say a word at first, just looked at me like she was trying to figure something out. I half expected her to accuse me of something, like maybe she'd heard what Mom had said, or sensed my judgment from across the patio. But instead she asked quietly, "Can I trust you?" That threw me. I mean, Kate and I weren't close. Friendly, sure. We'd done the usual sister-in-law bonding stuff. Coffee dates, wedding Pinterest boards, trying on dresses. But this wasn't small talk. She looked nervous, scared even, and I realized I'd never seen her like that. She always seemed so composed. I said, "Of course, because what else do you say?" She bit her lip, glanced back toward the party, and then just as quickly shook her head like she'd changed her mind. "Never mind," she said, voice flat. "Forget it." I watched her walk away, her white dress glowing under the string lights, her shoulders hunched just enough to say something was very wrong. And all I could think about was the message I saw on Jason's phone 3 weeks ago, when he left it at my apartment by accident. A message from someone named M. Just a single line. So when are you telling her? That was it. No name, no context, but the timing lined up. The secrecy did too. I'd meant to bring it up, to ask him about it, but my mom had been breathing down my neck about being supportive and not sabotaging this one like you do everything. So I kept it to myself. Maybe I should have come clean then, but I didn't. And now, standing there on the edge of the dock, watching my brother pose for photos with the woman he was supposed to marry, I felt the weight of all the things I wasn't saying settle right on my chest. I was going to let it go, I swear. I was, but Kate wasn't. Not for long. And what she did next would make sure that everyone, especially my mother, heard the kind of drama they never saw coming. For the rest of the evening, I played the part like I was supposed to, smiled in the group pictures, laughed at stories I'd heard 100 times, even helped Mom fix the crooked bow on one of the backyard lanterns as she hummed along to the playlist Jason had micromanaged within an inch of its life. But beneath every forced grin and nod of agreement, my stomach was twisted up like laundry in a washing machine, and no amount of sparkling wine or polite conversation could untangle the knot that had started forming the second. Kate asked me if she could trust me. That wasn't a casual question. It wasn't one you asked unless something real was cracking under the surface. And though I didn't know exactly what she meant in that moment, I had a gut feeling it had something to do with what I'd seen on Jason's phone, something he had gone out of his way to pretend never existed. The text had been short, barely noticeable, tucked between calendar reminders and generic messages from friends about fantasy football and wedding planning. It was the name that struck me first. M. Just a single initial. Not Mom or Mark or Melissa, no last name or emoji, just that cryptic little letter that meant nothing and everything at the same time. And then the words that had stuck in my brain like a splinter ever since. So when are you telling her? Not if, not maybe, but when, like there was a timeline, a plan, a confession that needed to happen. And Jason apparently hadn't followed through. At the time, I told myself to forget it. That maybe it was just a joke, a misunderstanding, or some bizarre inside thing I didn't need to get involved in. But deep down, I knew better. Jason wasn't the kind of guy who joked like that, especially not with other women. And even though he'd always had that shiny, clean image Mom worked so hard to protect, I remembered plenty of nights growing up when he wasn't where he said he'd be, or when she'd cover for him with the same tired lines. He's working late, or he's with friends, don't be nosy, because keeping up appearances mattered more in our house than telling the truth ever did. So that night, after everyone had left and the twinkle lights had been turned off and Mom had retreated to her room with a glass of wine and her nightly dose of denial, I sat alone in the kitchen with the last of the cake and stared at my phone, debating whether I should text Kate, whether I should break this unspoken rule that my mother had carved into me from birth. Never, under any circumstances, be the cause of the drama. Be in the drama, sure. Be blamed for it, often. But never be the spark. That role belonged to someone else. This time, I wasn't so sure I could sit on my hands and let it slide again. I didn't have to decide right then, though, because the next morning, as I was helping Mom rearrange the living room furniture for the bridal shower she was insisting on hosting, Kate showed up early, 2 hours early, and asked if we could talk, alone. She was pale, like she hadn't slept, and I could tell just from the way she avoided looking at my mom that something had shifted overnight. We walked down to the dock again, just like the night before, and this time she didn't hesitate. I know about the messages, she said, her voice calm but shaky. Like she'd rehearsed this a few times but still wasn't sure how it would land. I saw them. And I know there's someone else. My heart sank. Not just because it confirmed what I already suspected, but because the look on her face wasn't anger. It was heartbreak, betrayal, exhaustion. It was the look of someone who'd been hoping they were wrong and had finally run out of reasons to believe they were. I wasn't snooping, she added quickly, but he left his laptop open a few weeks ago. I saw the texts. They weren't just flirty. They were full-on emotional, like months deep. And when I asked him about it, he swore it was nothing, said I was being paranoid, but I've seen the name come up more than once since then. I didn't interrupt. I couldn't. All I could do was nod and wait for her to get to whatever came next, because I had the terrible feeling she wasn't done. And I was right. I think it's someone we know, she said softer now. Someone close. Otherwise, why would he hide the name like that? Just an initial, M. That's not a stranger. That's someone he's scared will recognize. I felt my throat tighten. My mind was already racing through every name we knew, family, friends, co-workers, mutual acquaintances from high school, even some of our own relatives, and it hit me that she was right. M could be anyone, but the deliberate vagueness, the way Jason had tried to bury it, it all pointed to something closer, something uglier. I don't know what to do, she admitted, finally looking me in the eyes. And I know your mom doesn't want anything messing this up, but I can't sit through a shower, smile for pictures, and pretend like I'm not losing my mind. So I need to know, am I crazy or do you think something's going on? And there it was, the choice I'd been trying to avoid since the night before. If I told her yes, if I confirmed what she already suspected, I'd be blowing up everything my mother had worked for. But if I lied, if I protected Jason again, I'd be complicit in something I didn't agree with. And worst of all, I'd be leaving this woman, this smart, decent, deeply hurt woman, to walk into a marriage with blinders on, all because it was easier for everyone else. So I told her the truth. Not everything, not yet. Just that I'd seen a message too, that it had bothered me, and that I hadn't said anything because I didn't know if it was my place. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she just nodded, like I'd given her the final puzzle piece she'd been waiting for. Then she looked back toward the house, where my mom was rearranging cupcakes and probably already planning the speech she'd give about family honor and legacy. And she said something I wasn't ready for. If he doesn't tell them himself, I will. I'm not going to be the fool in the dress. And before I could respond, before I could ask what she meant or try to stop her, she turned and walked back inside, shoulders squared like a soldier heading into battle. And all I could do was stand there on the dock, alone again, knowing the secret wasn't in the shadows anymore, and that the storm we'd all been avoiding was about to break loose right in the middle of Mom's carefully planned bridal shower. The morning of the bridal brunch started like every other carefully orchestrated family event my mother had ever thrown in her life, hyper-controlled, emotionally charged beneath a layer of Pinterest-worthy presentation, and teetering on the edge of catastrophe if even one person stepped out of line. She had woken up at 6, bustling through the kitchen in her silk robe, directing me like a one-woman SWAT team commander, making sure the mimosa bar was set just right, that the custom sugar cookies were arranged in alternating floral and engagement ring shapes, and that everyone was reminded, repeatedly, to smile, stay calm, and above all else, act like they gave a damn about the appearance of happiness. There was something almost feverish in her focus, as if she could hold everything together by sheer force of will and an endless supply of monogrammed napkins. I kept my head down and followed orders, not because I wanted to, but because I knew anything less would set her off, and there was already enough friction simmering beneath the surface to power a small city. Jason had barely spoken since the proposal dinner. He'd spent most of the time glued to his phone or pacing around the backyard pretending to take work calls. And Kate was doing that thing people do when they're trying not to fall apart in public. Smiling too much, laughing at things that weren't funny, and keeping her voice light like she wasn't standing on a trapdoor she'd been holding closed with both hands for weeks. The guests started arriving around 10:30, Mom's bridge friends, Kate's bridesmaids, a couple of second cousins we only saw at funerals, all of them sipping champagne and complimenting the floral arrangements while the tension in the room quietly thickened like gravy left too long on the stove. I could feel it in the way people glanced at each other, in the awkward silences that followed overly cheerful greetings, and especially in the way Kate's eyes kept flicking toward Jason, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere but here. He kept checking his phone, responding to texts with quick, guilty thumbs, and every time Kate caught him doing it, her fake smile cracked just a little more. Around noon, after everyone had eaten their tiny quiches and posed for the obligatory photos under the bride-to-be banner, my mom clinked her glass for attention and launched into a speech she'd clearly rehearsed in her head for days. It was full of cliches about family, tradition, and the importance of finding someone who complements your journey, delivered with the kind of smug confidence that only comes from a person who believes they've successfully orchestrated yet another flawless event. And for a moment, I thought maybe we were going to make it through, that maybe Kate had decided to let it go, or at least wait until later. But then Jason stood up to say a few words, and that's when the whole damn thing cracked wide open. He was halfway through thanking everyone for coming, for supporting their love story, when Kate suddenly stood up next to him, her smile gone, her posture stiff, and her voice dangerously calm. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She just looked at him, dead in the eye, in front of 25 stunned guests, and said, "Tell them about the other woman, or I will." The room went dead silent, like instant vacuum silent. You could have heard a pin drop from the driveway, and then, almost like a sound cue in a bad movie, my mother's fork slipped off her plate and hit the porcelain with a sharp, metallic clang. She froze, her face twisted somewhere between disbelief and horror, and Jason just stood there, holding his champagne flute like it was the only thing anchoring him to the earth, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, completely unprepared for the moment he'd clearly never thought would actually arrive. For a few unbearable seconds, nobody moved. Everyone was waiting, some confused, some pretending to be confused, but everyone watching to see what would happen next. Jason didn't speak. He didn't deny it. He didn't explain. He just stood there, blinking, like the words had physically knocked the wind out of him. And that, honestly, said more than any confession ever could. Kate turned to face the crowd, and the expression on her face wasn't rage or sorrow. It was something far colder, far more deliberate. "You all deserve to know the truth," she said. "This engagement was built on a lie. Jason's been seeing someone else, and not just once, not just a fling. It's been ongoing. He promised he'd end it. He told me he would, but he didn't. And I'm not going to stand here, wear the dress, smile for the pictures, and pretend like I'm not aware of it." Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "Oh my God." My Aunt Patricia actually clutched her pearls like we were in the middle of a soap opera. I looked at my mom, who looked like she'd just been slapped. Her mouth opened and closed a few times before she finally found her voice. "That's enough," she snapped, standing up and trying to reach for Kate's arm. "We don't need to do this here." But Kate stepped back, not rudely, just firmly, like she wasn't going to let herself be handled. "I'm sorry, but this isn't your moment to control. You wanted the truth? Here it is. He lied, and I deserve better." With that, she turned on her heel and walked out the front door, leaving behind the kind of silence that felt radioactive. Jason sat down slowly, like his legs had just given out, and stared at the table like he expected it to give him instructions. Nobody else moved. My mom looked at me, eyes blazing, and I knew exactly what she was thinking. That I had somehow orchestrated this. That I had encouraged Kate. That I had ruined everything, even though all I'd done was listen. But I didn't flinch. I met her gaze, steady and unrepentant, because for once I wasn't the one who detonated the bomb. Jason did that all on his own. I had just stopped pretending it wasn't ticking. And in that moment, I knew things would never go back to how they were, not in our family, not between Jason and Kate, and definitely not between me and my mother. The lie had unraveled, the truth was out, and all that was left now was the fallout. In the hours that followed Kate's walkout, the once buzzing house that had been carefully decorated to look like a bridal catalog exploded into an eerie, claustrophobic vacuum, as if every flower arrangement, every hand-lettered sign, and every ribbon-tied chair knew they were now part of a stage where something catastrophic had occurred. My mother, whose reputation and social standing within our tightly wound circle of old friends and extended family always depended on polished surfaces and clean stories, busied herself with rapid, almost manic energy, insisting on clearing dishes and straightening centerpieces that no longer mattered, as though if she could physically restore order to the brunch table, she might somehow erase what had just happened in full view of everyone. Jason disappeared. He slipped out the back door, probably assuming if he moved quietly enough, no one would notice the groom-to-be vanishing after being accused of cheating by his own fiancée in front of half the people he'd invited to celebrate their love. I didn't follow him, not because I didn't care, but because I wasn't going to be the one to clean up his mess this time. I had done that too many times before, whether it was lying to cover up missed classes, making excuses to girlfriends, or talking mom down from one of her high-strung meltdowns whenever Jason's golden boy image started to crack. That role had been mine for too long, and I had finally decided, maybe for the first time in years, to step away from the wreckage and just let him deal with the consequences he so expertly avoided. But that didn't mean I got to escape unscathed. Oh no. My mother came for me the moment the door closed behind the last guest. A forced smile still plastered to her face like a mask she couldn't remove without damaging her skin. She didn't raise her voice, not yet. But every word came out sharp and cold, like ice cubes dropped into boiling water, steaming with quiet fury. "What did you tell her?" she asked, not bothering to say Kate's name, because even acknowledging her presence now seemed like a defeat. "What did you say to make her do this?" I didn't answer at first. I just looked at her, this woman who had spent her entire life crafting a perfect picture out of chaos, who believed with her whole being that as long as the curtains were straight and the salad forks were polished, everything else could be ignored, denied, or rewritten later with the right tone of voice and enough wine. "What did you tell her?" she repeated, louder this time, and now the mask was slipping. I let out a long breath, not angry, not even defensive, just tired. I didn't tell her anything she didn't already know. I just didn't lie. That landed like a slap. She recoiled slightly, eyes narrowing, lips thinning into that familiar line she wore whenever someone disrupted her version of the truth. "You always have to make everything about you," she spat, as if I had proposed the toast that outed Jason's infidelity. "You can't stand not being the center of attention." I laughed. I didn't mean to, but it came out. Dry, humorless, a reflex against the absurdity of it all. "Are you kidding me? I've been trying to stay out of this since it started. You told me not to steal his spotlight, remember? Well, I didn't, he did. He brought this on himself." She looked at me like I was speaking another language, like the idea that Jason might be responsible for his own actions simply didn't compute. "He made a mistake," she said, as if cheating on someone for months and covering it up with carefully worded lies and digital footprints was some minor lapse in judgment. "But this is going to follow him. Do you understand that?" That's when I realized she wasn't worried about Jason's heart or Kate's. She wasn't even mourning the loss of the wedding. She was mourning the death of the image. The illusion of the perfect son, the perfect engagement, the perfect family, that was what mattered to her. Not the betrayal, not the broken trust, but the narrative she'd been selling to herself and everyone else for years. "I'm not going to pretend for him," I said quietly, not because I thought she'd understand, but because I needed to say it out loud. "I'm not going to pretend for you either." And with that, I turned and walked out of the room, not dramatically, not as some grand statement, just walked. Because staying there, in that space, under that roof, trying to explain honesty to someone who'd built her entire life on selective memory and surface-level charm, was like arguing with a locked door about why it should open. Later that night, long after the brunch had been packed away and the silence had settled in like fog, I got a call from Jason. He didn't say hello, didn't ask how I was. He just sighed into the phone like he was carrying something too heavy to hold. "You shouldn't have said anything," he said, voice low, ragged. "You made it worse." I sat there in my room, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the ceiling as I let that sink in. I had spent most of my life being quiet for his sake, cleaning up for him, covering for him. And now that I'd finally let the truth breathe, just enough to give someone else clarity, I was the villain in his story. Not him, me. "You were going to marry someone while lying to her every day," I said, not yelling, not even angry, just stating the truth as plainly as I could. "I didn't make it worse. You did." There was a long pause, Then a click. He hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't feel relieved. I just felt numb, like something had ended. Not just the engagement, not just the brunch, but something deeper. Something in our family dynamic that could never be put back together the way it was. And maybe that was a good thing. Maybe some things needed to break so new things could take shape. But as I stared out the window into the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that the fallout was just beginning, and that the next day would bring consequences no one, least of all my mother, was prepared to handle. The day of what should have been the wedding rehearsal began with a stillness that felt almost rehearsed itself, as if the entire house had entered into a silent pact, not to speak unless absolutely necessary, not to move unless movement served a purpose, and above all else, not to breathe too loudly in case it shattered whatever fragile, delusional sense of normalcy still clung to the air like stale perfume. The scent of roses, remnants from centerpieces that never made it to the venue, lingered around the foyer with a sickly sweetness, mixed with the faint smell of burned coffee and something sour that had seeped in overnight from the trash can my mother refused to acknowledge was overflowing. I hadn't spoken to Jason since the night he hung up on me, nor had I seen Kate, who, as far as I could tell, had gone entirely silent. No calls, no texts, no cryptic posts or desperate messages, just a digital void that left everyone guessing and most pretending not to care. My mother had shifted gears from damage control to complete denial, as if pretending the rehearsal dinner was still going forward would somehow trick the universe into snapping things back into place. She floated through the house like a ghost in heels, organizing napkins, calling vendors under the pretense of double-checking the details, and muttering about out-of-town guests and last-minute accommodations like there was still a bride-to-be planning to walk down the aisle. It was surreal, watching her cling to the illusion so tightly, her eyes glazed with determination and thinly veiled panic, refusing to accept that the picture-perfect life she had curated like a museum exhibit had cracked wide open. And the thing that struck me most wasn't the desperation in her movements or the tightness in her voice. It was the way she never once asked how I was doing, never paused to consider the role she had played in all of this by insisting that I keep my mouth shut, by demanding that I prioritize Jason's image over anyone else's dignity, by creating an environment where silence was treated like virtue and truth like betrayal. I left the house mid-morning, needing air, needing space, needing something that wasn't dripping in forced civility and dried out family resentment, and drove without any particular destination, just letting the wheels take me somewhere outside the boundaries of expectation. I ended up parked in the empty lot of the church where the rehearsal was supposed to happen, the sun bouncing off the stained glass windows like some cruel joke. The building too pristine, too innocent, to match the mess it had narrowly avoided hosting. I sat there for what felt like an hour, watching nothing, listening to the tick of my engine as it cooled, until a familiar knock came at my passenger window. It was Jason. He didn't look angry anymore. He didn't look proud or arrogant or smug in that way he always had when he knew Mom would clean up whatever disaster he caused. He looked tired, truly, deeply tired, like someone who had finally reached the end of the rope and had realized there was no one left holding the other end. He opened the door without waiting for permission and dropped into the seat beside me, sighing like he hadn't exhaled in days. "I talked to her," he said after a long pause, his voice low, gravelly, like it hurt to speak. "She's not coming back. She said she's done pretending she's okay with things she's not. Said she would have stayed if I had come clean sooner, if I had respected her enough to be honest before someone else had to do it for me." He didn't say thank you. He didn't apologize. He just sat there, looking straight ahead, like he was trying to see something far off that kept disappearing every time he blinked. "You really loved her?" I asked. Not because I doubted it, but because I wanted to hear him say it. And to his credit, he nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I think I did. I think I still do. But I got used to having things both ways, and I didn't think I'd ever have to choose." And there it was, the real confession. Not the name of the other woman, still a mystery, still floating in the shadows, but the truth about the man he had become. Someone so used to being protected that he never learned how to protect the people who loved him. "You wanted revenge," he added after a minute, turning to look at me, and there wasn't anger in his voice anymore, just resignation. "But I don't think you got it. You hurt Mom more than me. You hurt Kate more than you realize. You think you told the truth, but all you really did was blow everything up and walk away." I didn't respond right away because what do you say to that? That maybe he was right? That maybe my silence would have been less destructive? Or that maybe some things needed to be blown up to make space for something better? I stared at the dashboard and realized I wasn't sure anymore. "I didn't do it for revenge," I said eventually, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I did it because I couldn't live with myself if I stayed quiet one more time." We sat there in silence after that, neither of us moving, like two people trapped in the same wreck, but too exhausted to crawl out. And after a while, he opened the door, stepped out, and without saying goodbye, started walking down the sidewalk, his figure shrinking against the backdrop of the church until he turned a corner and disappeared. I didn't go to the rehearsal dinner. That never happened. I didn't answer when Mom called me later that night, probably to deliver a monologue about loyalty and forgiveness and the importance of family unity. I packed my bag, left a note on the counter, and drove back to my apartment with the windows down, letting the wind wash away the last traces of fake smiles and polite lies. Weeks went by. Life resumed, as it always does. I heard whispers through relatives about Jason dating someone new, someone with an M name, though no one said it outright. Mom stopped inviting me to family brunches, at least for a while, and Kate? She never called, never wrote, never showed up on social media again. It was like she stepped out of the story altogether, choosing peace over explanation. And maybe that's how it should end, not with a confrontation or reconciliation or some final tearful revelation, but with silence. With the understanding that not all truths need to be shouted to matter, and that sometimes the most powerful choices are the ones you make quietly for yourself after everyone else has walked away.